everyone. My name is Gabby Recession of ecosVC, and I'll be your host for today's broadcast. Welcome to the Center for Sustainable Materials Chemistry Innovation webinar series. Today, we're delighted to have Dr. Stephen Meyers of Inpria, Dr. Alicyn Rhoades from Bayer MaterialScience, and Dr. Judy Giordan of ecosVC as our moderator. The CSMC Innovation webinar series is presented by the Center for Sustainable Materials Chemistry, the Oregon Nanoscience and Microtechnologies Institute, the National Collegiate Inventors and Innovators Alliance, ecosVC, and of course the National Science Foundation. So before we get started, I have just a few quick announcements. After the presentation, the remainder of the hour belongs to you for your questions and answers. So please start sending in questions as soon as you have them, and we will get to them as soon as the open question and answer period begins. If you'd like to ask a question, please type it into the questions panel on your GoToWebinar interface. And finally, the recording of today's event, as well as the slide presentation, will be available on our website at www.venturewell.org within 1 week. All right, and now it's time to welcome our moderator, Dr. Judy Giordan. Judy, take it away.
Thank you, Gabby, and thank you so much for all of you who are out there in our listening audience, and most especially to my very special guest today, Dr. Stephen Meyers of Inpria and Dr. Alicyn Rhoades of Bayer MaterialScience. As Gabby has mentioned, I'm Judy Giordan. I'm a partner with ecosVC, and we are very honored to be working with the Center for Sustainable Materials Chemistry to help them as a nationally funded center for chemical innovation from the National Science Foundation going forward as they are starting to train students and build companies over the next 5 years of their grant. As Gabby mentioned, part of the work that we're doing on innovation with the Center for Sustainable Materials Chemistry, and I'm going to start calling that the CSMC because it's a tongue twister, is to help with webinar series. We do 3 per year. This is the last one for calendar year 2012. Nope, I'm lying. Gabby's screaming at me behind the scenes, I can tell. We have 1 more coming up in September, and then we'll have 3 more starting in 2013. This one is at the request of all of the graduate students, postdocs, and undergraduates involved in the center who felt that it was really important to help people understand the value of a career in a startup or an ongoing company. What you're going to hopefully learn today is what you can gain during your educational process, undergraduate or graduate school, to help you in your career decisions, and what are some of the reasons and key reasons for going to a startup or an ongoing company and why that's important for you. And then, as Gabby said, please keep asking us questions in the background. I see I'm getting questions in already. That's great, because we're going to ask all of those questions to our speakers. Before I introduce our 2 speakers officially, let me give you some background information. First of all, why is this so important? Well, according to Booz Allen, which is a major strategy and business development organization, their 2010 Global Innovation Report showed how the top innovators keep winning. Unfortunately, what they said was that this was not at the best time in our recessional dip, and R&D spending in 2009 showed that half of the companies tracked were going to have a cut. And these all came from the big kind of companies that we, as chemical scientists, solid-state material scientists, polymer scientists, usually touch on the most: automotive, computing, and big industrials and electronics. So that was not trivial, because if you're going to be innovative going forward and you're caring about innovation, not hiring is really tricky. And some executives actually worried that these cost-cutting moves were actually going to be painful because it was going to result in a weaker talent pool and a loss of market share because of this new shriveled product pipeline. They did mention, however, that they expected higher budgets into 2010 and 2011 going forward. But interestingly, they said they were going to take a wait-and-see approach to actual R&D hiring. This actually prompted a big concern, as you can imagine, among many of our students and many of our faculty. How do we actually help people gain good jobs? Well, is this better? First of all, the question is, we're scientists, is there real data? Maybe it's not going to happen. Well, unfortunately, it happens. And unemployment versus the general U.S. population has been relatively low for chemists, 3.8 versus 9.1, but we're still seeing a job impact. And a recent issue, a little less than a year ago in 2011, we did see a prediction that jobs would be easier to find in 2012. Recruiters and entrepreneurs can help. So the idea of startups as a major opportunity for careers paralleling industry, academia has never been all that large, and of course there's the federal government, has always been a big question. Well, with that in mind, how have the numbers been looking? Even if we aren't hiring as many as we would have liked, how are the salaries looking? Well, here are the data. Between 2002 and 2009, an average of 44% of PhD graduates went directly into full-time jobs. The majority of those who went into full-time jobs actually went into industrial positions, be it a startup or an existing company. The average range for a starting PhD was 69.4, usually, of course, higher for chemical engineers, lower for chemists, polymer scientists, somewhere in between. Numbers are much higher now. The highest paid PhD positions, those chemical engineering, material science, but these were in the government with an 82.5. Academic positions and industrial, you can see how they were looking. So the question really becomes, industrial positions, if they pay higher, is there a difference? Well, we wanted to show you a little chart that the students put together as a concept between large companies and startups. What's the common conceptions or maybe even misconceptions between benefits and downfalls? I think this is really interesting, and I do hope I get a lot of questions in around this from my listening audience, because, you know, this is an interesting point. People actually have a belief that large companies have the benefit that they know where they're going. They got big budgets, big salaries, big benefits, big prestige, and they're going to be around for a while. Fascinating when you think about the bailout in automotive and a few other things, but that still remains a perception. Downfalls, formality, stringent time requirements, probably not very innovative, not very open, not very friendly to people who want to be out there and be risk takers. Benefits for a startup, the perceptions are that you can be independent, it's informal. You know, we've all heard about, especially in the dot-com boom, massaging going on, and you had massages and latte machines, etc. You actually could diversify your skills, and you had an ability to help define a company culture. Well, of course, formality and the downfall of a large company, the company culture is pretty defined. Downfall perception, not a lot of resources. Not a lot of direct accountability. Interesting that people think that that's a downfall and stuff like that. Fascinating. And long-term insecurity. Okay, so that's not a good idea. Interesting set of concepts. Well, how are we going to get at this? Well, first of all, we're going to ask our panelists, each of our panelists, I'm going to introduce them and give them 2 broad questions and ask them to briefly respond, 1, 2, 3 minutes each. Then we're going to open the questions, the Q&A for you. You can start asking questions through this chat function anytime. I'm already seeing some questions coming in. Please, please, please keep those questions coming in. They're actually the majority of what we talk about today, and do not, under any circumstances, feel shy. The only bad question is the one you don't ask. And then we're going to finish by asking each of our panelists to summarize and leave you with some words of wisdom or advice. So with that in mind, let me start by introducing our speakers. It's my honor to have with me today Dr. Stephen Meyers. Stephen's a lead engineer at Inpria Corporation. He's designing and developing inorganic thin film solution precursor chemistries for high-performance optoelectronic applications. This is, as you can see here, Stephen was an original employee of Inpria, and this is an Oregon startup focused on developing disruptive manufacturing technologies for solution deposition of inexpensive and environmentally benign inks. And this is actually a company that came out of the predecessor for the Center for Sustainable Materials Chemistry and the professors who helped co-found that. So that's really very exciting, and we're delighted to have Stephen. His bachelor's degree is in chemistry from Mount St. Mary's University, and as we mentioned, PhD in inorganic chemistry from Oregon State. On the other side of the country, literally, and on the other side of the spectrum for big companies, we are honored to have with us today Dr. Alicyn Rhoades. Ali currently is Bayer, where she's responsible for product strategy development and implementation for optimization of Bayer's product offerings and competitiveness, focusing in industrial marketing for thermoplastic urethanes. Before that, she was with their innovation group and helps identify startup companies and startup opportunities and university technical innovation opportunities for linking with Bayer's market needs. Ali holds a PhD in polymer science and engineering from Southern Miss, and then she was a commercialization leader with their tech transfer organization before coming to the wonderful world of Pittsburgh, PA, as a research commercialization manager for a nonprofit that was helping link together industrial, larger companies and small startups. From there, she went to Bayer. So before, however, we get started, we want to know something more about your audience. So I'm going to hand this to Gabby because we're going to ask you a question about what's your primary career interest for those of you who are not in a career right now but still in school. Established company, startup, or academia, because we know the majority of our listening audience today are in academia. Take it away, Gabby.
All right, so I'm going to launch this poll and just give you a few seconds to respond. I'm going to count down now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, get your vote in if you haven't already. Super. All right. So I'd like to share the results of that poll, what your primary career interest is. It looks like 35% of the audience is interested in going into a startup. 24% of the audience is looking at an established company. And 41% of the audience is looking at academia. So Judy, I'll hand that back to you.
Oh, interesting. So Stephen and Allie, almost half our audience is thinking about an academic position. So we get an opportunity to dissuade them and think about the wonders of industry. It's fair to say, guys, I can't lie, everyone out there, I am an industrial chemist by heart and soul. I have had the honor of holding academic positions, but my heart and soul is in industry, no doubt about it. So I'm going to start by asking Allie a question. So Allie, way back when, you can see from her picture she's a kid, but I like to tease her, way back when you were deciding all of this, what were the top 3 factors that influenced your decision to actually think about an industrial position after graduate school? Why did you think this is a really good career opportunity for you? And help our audience figure that one out for themselves.
Okay. Hi, Judy. Thanks for the question. Yeah, so I've been out of graduate school for 6 years now, and I think when I was in graduate school, I had a lot of industry interactions. My graduate advisor had come from industry, and my undergraduate education as well was very industrially focused. So I always had a lot of respect for what happened in industry. I saw it as technology going to the marketplace and really changing people's lives, even their everyday lives, and I thought that was cool. So I wanted to influence technology in the marketplace, not leave it up to other people to do that. And I had the chance really to learn commercialization training through the IGERT program that was at Southern Miss when I was a graduate student there. That NSF IGERT program focused on commercializing technology from university labs, and thankfully for me, it really hit my sweet spot, and I was really able to capitalize on that as I moved into industry later. I think there is a real need for people who understand the science and the importance of fundamentals at the university setting, but that are able to translate that into something useful. I don't think that that has to be limited either to small companies. I think large companies really see the value in the things that happen at the universities, especially with the downfall of internal R&D, and that's a whole other topic. But big companies are increasingly looking outside for science and technology. I felt I could communicate those technical benefits and programs that I felt passionate about inside a company, and so I decided to go for it.
Well, that certainly says to me that you didn't think that all those downfalls and those negatives and those misconceptions about, or conceptions about companies were there. You felt that this was really an opportunity for you to learn more and make an impact in the marketplace and make an impact on the planet. That's really very cool. I don't think people always see that in that industry. My dear friend Dr. Meyers, I'm going to ask you the same question. What were the top 3 factors for you that influenced your decision to thinking about a startup after graduate school rather than going to a big company? Because, wow, you've got out there in Oregon HP and Intel and a whole bunch of other ones that I know a lot of your comrades and colleagues in school actually have gone to. So why did you pick this one? And what are some of the factors that you think our audience ought to be thinking about for themselves?
Well, coming out of the group that I came out of, we also had a lot of industrial interactions and a lot of opportunities to see how research was being taken from a university setting into various industrial applications. But for me, the top 3 factors really in choosing the startup and taking the route I eventually chose Number one was convenience and flexibility. Coming out of graduate school in 2008, the outlook industrially was not fantastic, and I was basically given an opportunity, a part of the country I really love, to carry on research that I had been involved with, from the beginning, to take that research and turn it into a commercial technology. So that would be the second factor, was the ability to take a research project I had been spending a lot of time on and to actually see it become an actual technology rather than just a product or a project. That was an exciting opportunity. And the last factor would probably be, there's potentially long-term financial benefits to the success of a startup that were certainly attractive going forward. But those three: the convenience, the flexibility, the ability to carry research that was my own forward, was exciting. And then the distant third would be the potential financial rewards for taking the startup route. But I should point out my startup route was perhaps different from a lot of people's, in that it was a case of the immediate founding of the company was at the same time I was coming out of school, and it was focused in part on commercializing my graduate research. So it was kind of a ready-made path that may not necessarily apply to everyone.
Stephen, let me just follow up on that, because I think it's important for people to get this one from just your personal perspective. There's no right or wrong here. This is just personal perspective. If it had not been your research and had not been local, meaning that hadn't been the opportunity, would you try to focus on a startup, or do you think you would have tried for a larger existing company industrial job?
In that case, I think it would have come down to whatever the position was, if it could capture my imagination, in terms of get me excited in the way that Alicyn mentioned, because certainly I think that would have been what the decision ultimately then came down to. Is look, I could have gone either way. I would have been, I think, happy. I had internship experience through the same IGRT program in an industrial setting and enjoyed it very much there, and I would have been happy going that route. I think if I had been given the same type of exciting research opportunity, that was just an obvious choice.
Cool. I think that's a very fair point, too, is that you can, like Alicyn said, make an impact. It can be either way, but sometimes there are certain mitigating factors that kind of help you along and make you feel better about it. And in your case, it was geography and it was your own research. So we'll leave the financial rewards alone, because I think that's the dream of everyone in the startup, and we know that statistics aren't always on your side on that one. Allie, I'm going to come back to you. You started out to tell us a little bit about this, so I thank you kind of in your first answer. But could you give our audience some things that you feel, and as I said, you already started with that, so that's great, but what were some of the experiences that you really felt prepared you for a career in industry, and that you might think our audience, even if they don't have it directly, well, maybe they ought to try to think about ways to get them that you think helped you?
Yeah, sure. First, though, I'm going to, maybe we'll start answering that question with the end in mind. So I really believe in industry, you have to be able to communicate the value of whatever technology you are promoting, whether you're in the lab developing that, or you're the one responsible for project management and pushing that through to commercialization. So you have to be able to communicate to those leaders who are responsible for the bottom line and that are responsible for answering to shareholders. So there are some key points, I think, in communication: clarity, being able to articulate the technology at different levels of detail that's appropriate for the audience, and then very well developing a value proposition that is understandable. And I think those three things I learned to do in both undergraduate and graduate school. So one benefit for me in hindsight, my graduate work was very interdisciplinary. My research was biology, polymer science, and medicinal chemistry. So I always had to communicate the importance of one of those disciplines to the other two. And that was always challenging. So on my committee, it was a very diverse group, so I had a lot of practice there, communicating the importance of a type of technology or science to people who maybe didn't know very much about it and bringing them up to speed. So different disciplines speak different languages, and the more you can verse yourself in how to bridge those gaps, the more successful I think you'll be. Secondly, my advisor had come from industry, so he was always infusing a viewpoint that encouraged us to define a value of what we were doing. And I would say that that does not detract from the science. It only adds to the potential of that science making a difference later. And then finally, again, I think that NSF IGERT training that we had, that commercializing technology program was completely important to me. But the pieces of it are so practical that if you were motivated, even outside of an IGERT program as a current student, to pick that up, I think the basics are available. You know, either working with someone who's already been in industry, having a mentor that has experience in that space, which I was thankful and lucky to have mentors who came from industry, and so I was really able to prepare myself appropriately for that. Is that good enough?
Follow up on a quick question for you on that one. This communication piece. I'm going to ask you a personal opinion. You've actually run a big chunk of the innovation, external innovation for Bare Material Science. And what you've actually had is a really great opportunity to go out and see academic institutions, academic opportunities, and see whether or not that's fitted for Bare Material Science. This whole question of communication, do you feel that it just is important in an industrial career? Or do you feel that those people who go into an academic career now more than ever need to be able to do those levels of communication, just even to get a grant, of explaining the value of their science, not just to do the science? And you said something so important. It doesn't detract from the value of the science. Could you help comment on the value of just being able to communicate in general, even in an academic environment, and the value in an academic environment of being sure you can communicate with your colleagues in startups and in big companies?
Yeah. Right. Sure. I think there's two pieces to that. Number one, you have to be able to communicate for collaboration's sake, right? So I think a lot of successful research, both now and in the future, will become more and more interdisciplinary. Very few people are going to work, you know, with horse blinders on all by themselves in their own individual lab. So communication for collaboration is very important. And for successful collaboration, you have to be able to paint a vision of where this is going, because you have to have a motivated group and a motivated team. I don't think there's a difference if that's occurring in academics, a small company, or a large company. But I think it's a common denominator for successful technology professionals. And I think in industry, what my job has been is to paint the vision for leadership. Say, here's where we are now, here's where the science is now, and here's where we can go, you know, and this is the path to get there. And I think that is probably very similar to what successful academic professionals will need in the next decades.
Thank you. I couldn't agree with you more. I think that was a really great segue. Dr. Steven, I'm going to ask you a similar question, if you don't mind. How did your experience in graduate school, you alluded to some of this, as did Ali in her first answer, how did your experience in graduate school prepare you for a career in a startup? And what are some of the things you think that people ought to be looking for in their own graduate careers that might be able to help them, or undergraduate careers, and being able to help them when they think about a startup?
The single biggest thing, and it's certainly a broad, you know, idea, but I mean, it's, for me, graduate school was about problem solving, and you're given a task or a objective, and you know, it's research, right? So you don't know how to solve this problem, or you don't know how to arrive at the appropriate answer, and you have to you know, work your way through it, working with other people, working, you know, on your own, taking advantage of resources that are around you, or reaching out for, you know, resources and making connections that haven't been made before. But I mean, that ability to define the problem you're trying to solve, and then break it down into steps, break it down into experiments, that whole process of problem solving was easily the most important, you know, part of my graduate experience, where, you know, we are constantly being asked, you know, as has been mentioned, through industry academic collaborations in my graduate career, companies were asking for solutions to given problems on a time horizon, that was appropriate for an academic project. But in order to arrive at a solution, you had to really break it down into chunks and be able to fit each little piece together and put it back together at the end. And coming then into a startup, it was in some ways shockingly similar in that there's some overall objective and some idea of what needs to be accomplished, but you don't have necessarily the same levels of management or the same levels of direction saying, look, this is what we're doing tomorrow, this is what we're doing the next day, this is what this is how we're going to tackle this problem. No, it was very much up to me to say, look, how are we going to solve the problems that are facing us, and then to go out and actually do it. So I mean, I find myself doing things that are totally unrelated to any kind of chemistry, whether they are engineering problems or whether they are things as mundane and simple as hazardous materials shipping, DOT regulations, things like that. But as a graduate student, that was in some cases that was 75% of getting the answer, was just figuring out how to deal with the kind of hurdles that were in front of you and solve the problem. And so I think that was just that general problem-solving ethos that I think kind of evolves as you're thrust into a research project and said, when someone says, here, solve this problem, you kind of have to sink or swim. And that ability that was kind of imbued upon us, I think really helped once I moved to the startup, because I'm constantly doing similar things where that kind of resourcefulness is important.
Yep. No, I see your point. Absolutely true. Whether it's in a big company or a small company, as Alicyn mentioned, the ability to communicate, solve a problem, communicate back where it's going, it's really an important piece of this. It's time for me to open this up to our audience. Ms. Gabby, I'm going to hand the controls back over to you so I can just focus on all the questions that have been coming in and start asking our speakers. Ready to take over?
Yes, indeed. Just give me a moment, and I will switch our screen.
Thank you. Okay, so let me get started. And I first of all want to thank all of you who have been slewing in these questions here. I really appreciate it. So let's get started. So, okay. I have a really interesting set of questions here. So let's start with this one. We have a bunch of questions here that have to do with how high do I have to go in the academic ladder before I can actually think of a real career in industry or a startup or in a large program, a large company. So Ali, I'm going to start with this one for you. But the question I'm getting from a couple of people has to do with what are the advantages or the key disadvantages of completing a PhD program as compared to a master's program? Do I really need to get a PhD? That sort of thing. So I'm going to start, Ali, with you kind of giving people from your perspective, especially from a large company viewpoint, the value, the different types of jobs you might be able to think about, whether you get a PhD or not. And then, Mr. Stephen, if you don't mind, I'm going to come back to you on that same one and ask for a startup. So, Ali, could you help our audience with that one, please?
Yes, thank you. That is a great question. And I'll be honest, I struggled with that, I think, every year, as a student. In short, I think at big companies, there is a little bit of a mechanism to hiring and placement and levels. It's just a function of having a company with thousands and thousands of people, right? There has to be some way to bring people in logically, right? So I think a PhD does give you a hiring edge in a company. It brings you in at a higher level than with a bachelor's or a master's. That said, excellent people excel just fine with a master's at Bayer. And I can only speak for companies I'm familiar with. I think it's harder for people with a bachelor's to ultimately get into leadership, but it's completely doable. It's just almost like a matter of time. A PhD is a bit of a It's a huge leg up in terms of being considered for leadership. And part of that is they do believe that you have learned a set of both leadership and technical skills, which, you know, if you don't come in with a PhD, you need to learn all of that on site, and you may never actually capture the full PhD intensity. So from a personal perspective, I can say that my PhD really taught me to think independently and to think through problems and to think through, you know, think through more complicated situations and scenarios where I was really responsible for finding solutions, pushing the boundaries of technology, but also of project management, because you're ultimately managing your own project. And all of these experiences are just valuable. So for me, if I had to choose, even though at the moment I don't work in the labs, I don't use my science PhD hands-on at the moment, the actual education has been can be directly correlated to my success in industry, I think. So for me, I say, if you can afford it, go for it. It's a great idea. If you can't, don't be discouraged, because excellent people that are motivated and have talent will excel, you know, with a master's or a bachelor's. But again, it is a huge springboard, I think, for a career, the PhD is.
Yep, I see your point. It definitely has to do with large companies, the nature of the culture of that particular company, and understanding and getting to know people. My suggestion, I could just build on it from my background in industry, is whoever is interested in an industrial career and you think you know the kind of industry you're into, start talking to some people out there, because Allie knows her companies, I know the former companies I was with, but you need to know the companies you'd be interested in and see who's actually made it to the top. Check who's actually been successful, because it's always interesting. Not every company is identical. Dr. Stephen, what do you have to say on that one, please, from the standpoint of the wonderful world of a startup? Do you think a PhD makes a big difference there, or what would you suggest? Or does it matter the kind of role you want, whether you're on the business side or the technical side?
Well, by the definition of a startup, you know, we haven't been around long enough, and any company, any startup hasn't been around long enough, perhaps, to see how you know, leadership positions and management evolves in the long run. But I would say, just in the experience I've had, and you know, the hiring process I've been involved with here, I mean, I'm much less concerned with you know, someone's level of education or their formal degree than, frankly, their ability, yeah, to come in and just solve problems and work on a variety of projects without a lot of management. You know, because that's the one thing we're short on constantly is management, right? I mean, you have to be able to, as Allie indicated, work independently and you know, solve problems without a lot of supervision. And I've really seen it go both ways in terms of education. As you know, for me, certainly my PhD was an important part of my being able to solve that kind of problems. But I know people who, whether through life experience or work experience, you know, the PhD was pretty much a formality in the sense of it didn't teach them anything. They already knew about solving problems. They didn't already know. And conversely, I've met a couple people who, frankly, have come out with PhDs that that wasn't one of the skills they picked up. And so from my perspective, I mean, it usually comes across pretty quickly, actually, once you start just talking about the kinds of problems you need to solve, whether they have that capability or not. And I don't think, in my experience, it hasn't trended, you know, directly in all cases with you know, level of degree from a BS to a master's to a PhD. We've had them all, and you know, it's frankly, for some problems, I'd rather have someone with, you know, a bachelor's and a lot of experience than a PhD in a second. But
okay,
it really depends on the problem.
Thank you. Thank you. Ellie, I'm going to go back to you. I've got a question here about industry, and people want to know what they can leverage. When you think about graduates, as a graduate student, we have a couple of people here who have asked this question in a couple of different ways. They're interested in an industrial experience in going into industry. Is there a way for them to steer their PhD, or think about how to do their PhD, or think about ways to be multidisciplined, like linking a minor in accounting or management or something that could actually help them with a leg up, or give them a way to have it, in quote, counts towards work experience that will help you get a leg up in the starting job market?
Good question. I have been involved in some interview processes, and I can say that people who differentiate themselves on paper are always, you know, at the top of the pile. So on that note, I would also say that we don't usually hire from a resume pile. You know, we obviously consider everybody that comes in, but we always make sure that we can talk to someone about the individual, whether they have had some connection with Bayer or whether we can, you know, seek out someone in their department or learn more about their work. So I would say the personal connection is very important. So if you have some ideas, you know, start networking. That is key. So very, very, very soon, start networking with industry professionals if you haven't already. It's completely doable. ACS, other organizations, just get out there, get yourself known, take some cards, make some cards, meet some people, call them back, call me, call Judy, you know. Now, as far as a minor, it's a great idea, but don't distract yourself from what you know, what your core competencies need to be, and make sure that it is actually something meaningful. So in my own experience, the sort of graduate minor commercializing technology was exactly spot on. Would an accounting minor have done the same thing? No, but it would be an exposure, you know, acknowledging that you understand financials are important, acknowledging that you have some feel for what it takes to write a business plan or run a business is really, I think, differentiating and very important if you want to get into industry. It can't hurt anything as long as you still do a very solid job on your science.
Great. Yep. No, I absolutely see your point on that one. I got a couple of questions going here about people, and I'm not sure if either one of you are really going to feel good about answering this question. But I got a bunch of people here who are really interested in pursuing careers. How do I say it this way? Everyone is acknowledging, there's a couple of them here, people are acknowledging that as much as we would love to know that we could get our degrees here, undergraduate, graduate, whatever, and keep jobs in this country, we're not hiring as much in this country. When one thinks of the wonderful world of the hiring rates or sees the hiring rates of China, India, etc., when you think about that, you're getting a degree over here and pursuing a career in a foreign country or with a foreign company, because that's what I'm hearing. I've got a couple of questions here to talk about foreign country, foreign company. Is there a possibility? I'm not sure which one of you can really handle this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to start, Stephen, with Stephen, and then Allie, because you showing my prejudice. Sorry about that one. Since Bayer is a German company, you have a slight feeling for how that works in a large company. Stephen, when you thought about starting a company, did you even know about startups in foreign countries, or any thought about trying to move over to foreign countries from a startup perspective? Do you have any things you'd like to bring to bear on that one? You may not. If you don't, that's fine. I just want to ask.
You know, not specifically in terms of starting a company in a foreign country, but certainly the opportunity has come up to work in a foreign country, you know, even at a startup, and I think given you know how global the effort is on pretty much any large-scale technology, whether it's pharmaceuticals or electronics or microprocessing. I mean, these are global industries, and the interconnection between companies is so vast that I think whether you're working for a multinational that's based in the U.S. or whether you're working for a startup that interfaces with multinationals based in another country, I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity there, frankly. In fact, in my experience, there's more opportunity than there are people who, you know, are willing to take advantage of it, in the sense of, you know, it requires, you know, a long stay in a place that, you know, you might not otherwise have expected to find yourself.
Do you see any advantages, specific advantages or disadvantages about moving to a foreign country or pursuing a career or taking part of your career steps in a foreign country?
Not necessarily, except that in some cases I have seen where, you know, the ability, the experience gained there can basically add a facet to your own, basically to your resume or your, I mean, really it's much more personal than a resume. It's your actual skill set in terms of being able to work in a different culture and being able to, you know, interface with a different business culture than you otherwise would be able to. I mean, that's a skill set I see people exercise a lot, and I'm impressed by it regularly.
No, it's an excellent point. Allie, I'm going to go over to you because you do work for a large multinational that's really actually headquartered in Leverkusen, Germany. So what's your perspective on making sure, and you have a lot of colleagues, I know, who have done expat positions over there and moved back and forth a lot, including even to China and Asia. Well, what's your words of wisdom on this and the opportunity for career development?
I think it's a great idea. If you have the flexibility in your personal life to do it, and you are, you know, you're willing to consider it, I think on the career side, it's perceived as a very big plus. I think the perception of someone who it moves around is not connected to one spot, you know, geographically, that's really, really positive. The skill set you can build in international business, like he said, absolutely valuable and absolutely going to be more valuable as this globalization continues to, you know, become more and more dominant. I think at large companies, they value it extensively. I know at Bayer, opportunities are very readily available if you're willing to go to Asia or Europe or Southeast Asia. You know, there's opportunities all over the world, and if you are able to do it, I would say give it real consideration. And it doesn't always have to be a long-term thing. It can be a couple-year adventure, and then you come back. The important thing to do if you choose to embark on one of these international career moves is to maintain your connections in the States if you plan to come back. I have seen people who have taken these opportunities and who kind of just drop off the map for a few years. And it's really hard to come back because ultimately business is about, it's about this network that you have and the people that you interact with, and these are the people that are going to open the doors and make sure there's a spot for you when you're ready to come back and keep you abreast of what opportunities exist in the States when you're on the flip side. So I would really encourage people to consider it, but keep your communication lines open while you're in the midst of the experience.
I couldn't agree with that one more. Just adding my 2 cents, which I usually try not to do to the speakers, but I got my PhD, it's fair to say, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away compared to our speakers. But the bottom line is very simple. I postdoced in Germany, and that postdoc made all the difference in the world. My first position, the first time I became a vice president at a German company, which turned out to be at a German company, and much of it was because of the connections and the capabilities and the skill sets that I acquired during that postdoctoral year. So when you think about a career, in an industrial career, thinking about a postdoc as a way to get you in there and get you to do that is not a trivial point either. So it's really not a big difference here about those two. What I have here is just a general question I'd like to ask. So what I'm here, I got a question here that I'm going to throw out to Allie first, and then I'm going to bring in Stephen. But question about reconciling. Well, when you think about the type of research and research expectations that happen when you get your PhD, and Allie, you talked about having a very interdisciplinary PhD, and Stephen, you talked about problem solving. So from those sorts of perspectives, and when you think about this idea of the traditional idea that in a big company, you can't be a risk taker and you've just got to focus on the little piece of research they tell you or whatever, and while in a startup there's the conception that you can do anything you want. Questions I've got here, there's a couple of them are this recurring theme of reconciling, thinking about research expectations with an academic PhD, translating those skills and that capability to an industrial R&D environment or a startup R&D environment. How does that actually work, and is there something that you can be very specific about that people can actually try to do either while they're doing their academic research or think about as they transition in or try to transition in to make that happen? Sally, I'd like to start that one with you, and then Stephen, I'm going to pop that one over to you.
Sure. I think if you're in graduate research right now, you should be able to articulate the value proposition of what you're doing. Even if it is very fundamental, you should be able to tell someone on the street or on your committee or on your university's financial board or at NSF, there's lots of different audiences, but you should be able to articulate the value of what you're doing and why you're doing it and where it's going. That comes back to painting the vision, and I think your whole career is about painting the vision, both for your own career and for the projects that you're responsible for along the way. So that's number one. As far as the reconciling academic research to industrial research, it's not necessarily the same. There are places in industry, large companies, where there is still some sort of central fundamental research organization happening. Increasingly, I think that's shifting to more applied research. If you have a real heart for fundamental research, you might be frustrated at in an industrial lab. I mean, if you are content, and I don't mean that as a second place kind of content, it's just a different type of development. Development focused on a specific goal rather than blue sky, right? If you're comfortable with that, reconciling the skill set that you have from graduate school and translating that to being useful in industry won't be difficult. Industry labs are generally, at least large company labs, are well staffed. You see the same kind of expertise, broad, deep. It can be a very intellectually challenging place, even if you're focused on new product development, rather than fundamental molecular science. So I wouldn't be afraid of that. What I would do, if you're considering it, is find somebody in industry that you can call, spend a day with them. Maybe visit some industry labs, start seeing the way that they do things. And I think more companies than you would imagine are willing, absolutely willing, to open their doors or have coffee with you, talk about the differences specifically. Because I think it does also vary by discipline. It's probably different in, chemistries that are more pharmaceutical facing than they are polymer or plastics facing. There's a bit of a spectrum there. But number one, communicate and make the judgment call for yourself. But I think there's still plenty of challenges to be done in industry.
Thank you. I think I couldn't agree with that one more. Stephen, could you help, that idea of how to, in your case, you did transition, right? It was your PhD thesis, it's transitioning in, but can you kind of, from what you've been seeing, what do you think about this transition and how you can actually kind of reconcile those two pieces in a startup?
Well, I think, as was mentioned, the communication aspect. If you can communicate not just what your objective is and the value proposition, but I think probably in a startup or in a more established company, you have some scientific objective as a researcher you're trying to accomplish, and you have to be able to project and define pathways and steps to accomplishing an objective that you really you don't know the answer yet, or it wouldn't be a problem for you to solve. But you have to be able to communicate how you're going to solve it and propose appropriate timelines to solve it, and be able to basically bring other people to see how your project is going to play out while it's playing out, because you aren't working alone by any means in any industrial environment, whether it's a startup or an established company. You have to bring other people into your research and either collaborate directly or respond to management's needs to place time horizons on projects. And I think that's a tough transition for people, I think, to make. Is it's no longer just a research project that has to get done. It's a research project that has to get done in X time, and you have to tell someone before you do it how you're going to do it and when you're going to have it done by. And being able to do that in a reasonable manner is not easy for everyone. And certainly for me, that was something I struggled with.
Oh, it's a very wise piece of advice. It's a really, really interesting piece. And it's not even saying necessarily that you're guaranteeing the research is going to come out the way you want, but the ability to plan it, think it through, communicate it. Both of you have been really emphasizing, it's wonderful to hear, communication. That's really, really fantastic. The ability to communicate and be open. And communicate doesn't just mean telling people, but also listening to their ideas and feeling good about not suffering from a not-invented here syndrome and incorporating that in and talking to people. I think that's really important. Guys, I got a couple of questions, and first of all, I'm going to apologize to every single one of our wonderful wonderful audience members who've sent in questions. I've been doing my best to get to all of them, but as fast as our panelists are answering them, they're coming in. So I apologize if I won't get to all of them. But let me ask a question that has to do with financial security. Okay, I got a bunch of questions on financial security here. So the questions about job cuts and stability, a question about financial security, and whether it's secure enough. And I'd like to ask each of you, and all you can each do is just, if you take no more than a minute or so, because I have one or two other questions I'd like to try to get to, but from your own personal perspective, because that's all you can do, right? Help our audience understand the, in quotes, stability from a job and financial security standpoint, from a startup and a large company standpoint. Ms. Allie, I'm going to start with you from a larger company perspective. Think about the financial piece, the security piece, and stuff like that, and job cuts and stuff like that. What would your thoughts and words of wisdom be as you're thinking about building your career along these lines?
That is a challenging question, number one. It's easy to say big companies have more stability, and I would think it's true that big companies will always have, well, not always, but for example, it would take a lot to knock out a Dow or a DuPont, knock them off the face of the planet, right? But that does not mean that each division, each subdivision, each subdivision is really looked at as a small unit within a big company, and that's a piece that a lot of people on the outside don't understand. It's very much like an agglomeration of small organizations that sort of make a large organization. And if there's a business decision that wipes out your organization, your sub-organization, that doesn't mean you were doing a bad job. In fact, your job security can be completely decoupled from your performance because of a strategic move at the top. So I think big companies are challenging in the light of job security if you don't do a good job of networking inside your company, knowing your company culture, and making sure that your skill set and that your value to the company is articulated outside of the walls of your sub-organization. It's very easy to get pigeonholed, I think. Financial gain, I think Stephen probably will tell you that one of the reasons he was interested is because of the potential reward. I think at a large company, if you make it into leadership, it's pretty lucrative. In the labs, the jobs are respectable and everything else, and the salaries are respectable, but you're not going to become a bazillionaire by working in, the bear labs for your whole life, probably. The big companies own the intellectual property that you develop, etc. So there is a risk-reward trade-off, I suppose. But again, I think you should never, ever give your professional identity to a company, whether it's a small company or a large company. Just always be very cognizant of the professional environment around you. Know your company's overall strategy and make sure that you have a broad network. And it's not a safety net. It's really you always want to be taking the best opportunity for your personal situation and have the independence to capitalize on it.
No, I think it's very wise advice. Stephen, how would you comment on this whole idea of stability and financial security? And we know that you're going to make bazillions in Inpria. We know that's going to happen, but how do you feel about that, and how does that all fit together, and what would you say to our audience?
I mean, it's tough to follow that last statement because, I mean, maintaining your professional identity, as she indicated, I mean, I think that's really important, that you and your skill set and your connections exist outside of whatever job you're in, whether you're in a startup or in a large company. And, certainly we're dealing on, what amounts to, a 2-year time horizon where, look, I don't know what's going to happen beyond there in terms of this company, even being around, right? I mean, that's a given for the early stages of any small startup that isn't, funded massively from the get-go. And that's just something you take as a fact of life. I mean, I don't think it we have a lot of people, not a lot of people, we don't have a lot of people. We have several people here, who come actually from industry where, they were longtime employees who basically saw their position, as Ali indicated, basically for no fault of their own or no performance issue of their own, whole sections of their company were basically reorganized or moved. And, what they thought was a stable position was now, no longer even extant. And so they're at a startup now. And they may not have the probability of a long-term certainty, but, they have a job right now in managing your finances and managing your professional identity. I mean, you can do it just as well in either setting, I think. You just have to be aware, that what you're doing now, you can't separate that from the future, right? You're always working towards the future, whether it's at a startup or industrial established.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, in the end, we're all the CEOs of our own companies, right? We're all the CEO of me.life. And to ask us, anybody else, to own that security, that's just not something that exists. We've got 4 minutes remaining. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to take 1 minute, and then Gabby, I'm going to let her finish up because I want to be mindful of our time, and all of you have been wonderful. Again, I apologize for some of those questions I didn't get to. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to take a minute and give you the top 2 to 3 key takeaway messages that if they could leave you with this last piece of information for you to consider from their viewpoint in a larger existing company and a startup, here's what they would give you as their words of wisdom. Ali, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, thanks. First, thanks for logging on. I think you're making good decisions by even logging on and listening and thinking about this stuff ahead of time. Number 2, I would say if you're a creative, dynamic, science person, don't be afraid to go to a big company because they're looking for people to make a splash. Anybody that's passionate and good about, good at what they do and passionate about what they do, you'll be successful either place. Both small companies, large companies, and academics all have their own cultures. You have to learn them. You have to know the people. You have to navigate. You can't be timid about your own career. And you have to take ownership of it. And don't be afraid to fail because that's how you'll learn. So build a good network. The people that you know and that you meet, keep in touch with them. And that's how we all do well, by getting to know each other, finding out what our strengths are, and working together. So just don't be afraid to give it a shot. Thanks.
Thank you. Stephen, final words of wisdom, please. Stephen, come off mute.
I think the easiest thing for me to say in terms of words of wisdom is it's your problem, it's your career, it's your it's your identity, and everything you're faced with is something that you have to solve, and there's different ways to go about doing it. But it's all about taking that ownership and saying, look, I'm going to make the right contacts to figure out how to solve this problem. I'm going to make the right contacts to advance my career. I'm going to make the right contacts to the job I want. So, as you're a graduate student, don't just focus on the science. Focus on getting out there, going to conferences, meeting people, and also seeing what it's like in the different situations. The opportunity to do an internship or a professional visitation, as Alicyn suggested. I think those are all really good ideas. And if you're looking at a startup, I think most people coming out of graduate school, you're relatively young. It's a great opportunity, a great time to really try and see if you can just carry something forward that you're interested in. So I'd say, take their chance, take the risk.
You hear the same thing from everybody. Communicate, take a chance, take a risk, and you're in charge. And I hope you found some really solid tips today, specifically how to take action on all of those important topics. I'm going to thank our 2 fantastic panelists today. Thank the CSMC and ONAMI for support of the work that we're doing here with the Center for Sustainable Materials Chemistry. And Gabby, I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of close it out. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Judy, and thank you, Stephen and Alicyn. And thank you to all of our audience members for joining us and for sending in all of your great questions. As Judy said, we hope we got to as many of them as we could. And thank you for coming. And we hope that you'll join us for future webinars. You'll find out about those on the University of Oregon website here for the center, and we also have everything on venturewell.org/webinars. And if you want to watch this webinar again, there are any tips that you want to write down, or if you want to refer to friends or colleagues, here is the link. It's at venturewell.org, and if you go there, if you don't have time to write this down exactly, you'll find that it's easy to link off right off that main page. So thank you very much for joining us, and have a good day.